Welcome to our monthly video blog where we look at all things SMSF and superannuation in general. I thought this month it'd be worthwhile having a look at some of the processes that we go through to actually establish an SMSF together with the corporate trustee and some of the issues that we might crop up with when we're actually undertaking this process. In general, it's a fairly straightforward process. We go in and we enter all of the relevant details into our software provider, and it spits out a trust deed together with the corporate trustee, and we have an API which allows us then to apply for the ABN and TFN for the fund. In the main, as I say, this is a fairly straightforward process, but unfortunately we do occasionally come up with some issues. One of the most interesting issues that we have come up with over the last 12 months was where a client had unfortunately been in a position where the client's personal information had been compromised, and this included her TFN. The ATO puts a block on the TFN under these circumstances, and I understand from the discussions that I've had that's because the ATO cannot actually issue a replacement TFN under these circumstances. It appears that once you've got a TFN, it's your TFN for life. What we needed to do under this particular scenario was for the client to contact the ATO, get the block removed for 24 hours, which allowed us then to go in and input all of the ABN data. And of course, the relevant piece of information here is that when we're inputting the request for an ABN, we have to put down all of the associate details for the super fund. And associates can include, of course, the corporate trustee and the individual members, their TFNs, dates of birth, etc., etc. So, of course, you can see that where part of the information is compromised, we don't end up with a TFN. One other issue we've seen a couple of times is where the ATO selects on a random basis an SMSF for effectively a superfund registration establishment audit. It's an interesting process to go through, and in some cases we can understand why the ATO's targeted a particular fund. We had one fund where the respective superannuation balances for each client were not particularly high, and the ATO was clearly suggesting that it may not be in the client's best interests to establish the SMSF. In the second case, we were unable to come up with any logical reason as to why the ATO would target the particular trustee, and we just assumed that this is totally random, which they're entitled to do. But the process was actually quite interesting. An initial approach was made by the ATO to one of the trustees, because they have all of the personal information for those trustees, and an initial telephone discussion was held about the appropriateness of the SMS structure for that particular individual. This then leads on to a letter that is received giving you a clear idea if what's necessary to go through in order to go through this particular audit. Now, what they do ask is for a range of documents to be provided to the ATO so that they can clearly check the structure has been correctly applied for and set up. So to give you an idea, they want copies of the trust deed, copies of the original meeting minutes, evidence of accounts held by the fund at banks or other financial institutions. That's a bit of an interesting one because, of course, unless we have an ABN, we can't actually establish a bank account. So a bit of chicken and egg there. Importantly, they also require details of the investment strategy, and they're looking at in particular, the signed trustee declaration form. Now, this latter form is particularly important because this is what the trustees sign to effectively say, we know what we're doing. We're aware of our obligations and we understand how we need to go about meeting those obligations in respect of our capacity as trustees of an SMSF. The issue with respect to the investment strategy is also quite interesting. And I'm pleased to say that the investment strategy that we utilise for a lot of the clients with strategic SMSF solutions has passed with flying colours. Most of the investment strategies I see, I would regard as being insufficient. They don't meet the conditions of the regulations, and they certainly don't meet the standards that the ATO are now suggesting to auditors that they apply to each of the investment strategies for funds. Interesting one. The process then goes through the collection of data by the ATO, and then the individual or joint trustees are then interviewed over the phone by the ATO case officer. In the most recent case that we had, we took the opportunity to have a bit of a coaching session with the trustee, which was perhaps unnecessary because we actually had a very, very competent trustee, and she sailed through. Interestingly, the ATO had absolutely no issues either with the establishment, with the level of knowledge displayed by the trustee, and any of the documentation issues. And the trustees received their ABN within 48 hours. We were delighted to see this. So, from our perspective, I guess the message is that whilst we expect that an SMSF can be fairly straightforward in terms of its establishment and registration, it may not always be so. Far from the ATO's request for information and for effectively a desk audit of the establishment process being seen as unduly harsh, we actually think that this is a positive for some of the SMSFs that we have under our control, because our trustees are able to demonstrate that they do know what they're doing. And this is extremely important. We actually view the audit process as being quite educational because it really does show us what the ATO is after in understanding their responsibilities as the regulator of SMSFs and their oversight of the SMSF sector. As I say, we expect things to go through fairly smoothly, but don't be at all surprised if something doesn't happen. But you should also bear in mind that we are here at Strategic SMSF Solutions to assist both advisors and clients into navigating any issues to do with problems with the ATO registration. That's all for this month. Look forward to catching up with you next time.